guys are really going to like this. Things are coming out of it. And you're going to understand it. And those who have been raised up Orthodox are going to say, of course. Don't you understand this? That's what's going to happen. Okay. This is how we re-sacralize culture. This is how we do it. There's no other way. There's no other way. So the secularism in the culture, secularism is sickness of the soul. It's a disease of the soul that affects the mind. And the effect is that you don't see the sacred dimension of creation anymore. You just don't see it. And that fosters hopelessness. That fosters despair. Because what if you have? You have nothing, but you have nothing. In the end, you have nothing. We can go into detail about that later, but we won't. So there's two dimensions to this. Okay, we just see 3 weeks ago when we were doing the liturgy for Thaddeus, and I was reading the Gospel from Jude, and I was standing up here. The section we read is where he describes those who have left Christ, have no reference to God at all. And he says they're like clouds without moistures, autumn trees that don't bear fruit, pulled up by their roots. And he's describing the people who have rejected any notion of the transcendent. And I'm reading this, and as I'm reading it, the thought comes to me, this is nihilism. What he's describing here is what we call nihilism in philosophical terms. Nihilism is there's nothing real except death. We exalt death, we diminish life. Why? Because we're all going to die, we're all going to snuff out the light, which is the prevalent philosophical view, which is the philosophical way of describing the spiritual malaise, sickness, secularism. Follow that? So philosophically, what Jude is doing, he's describing from a theological, in poetic language, the theological depth of what philosophically we define as secular, as nihilism, the exaltation of death. But the interesting thing about Jude was that he locates the cause and thus the solution, not in the philosophical explanation, as important as that is, but in the heart. And what he says is what leads to this poverty of the soul that he's describing. And remember, this was written 2,000 years ago. It starts with anarchy in the heart. That's where it starts with. And the primary anarchy he is pointing to is sexual anarchy. And as I've been thinking about this for 3 weeks, that's what Paul does in Romans 1. That's what he does in Romans 1. The nihilism that we have come to as a culture has its source and origin in the human heart. That's where it has its source and origin in the human heart. And the only healing of someone who is trapped in the nihilistic darkness, it's an abyss, it's a great anguish of soul, is to work on his heart so he can be lifted out of that. It's the only way. You can't persuade a person out of that. All you can do is offer him the hope of Christ, because only Christ can restore the soul to its proper order. Now, when that happens, and when that begins, what do you do with the emptiness of the cultural space? How do you see it? What fills it? Where is the light? Where is the beauty? Where is the meaning? Where is the language? That's what the church gives us. That's what we're doing tonight. When we sing these verses of praise to the Theotokos, and as we enter the worship, which is to say also comprehend the language, because there's no worship without language, because that language reflects the deep structure of the reality and of creation, that worship itself, number one, becomes a means by which the soul is healed, and as the soul is healed, the means by which the mind begins to see creation, reality, as it really is. Following me on this? So this is really what we're doing tonight. We have a handful of people here. That's okay. That's okay. Because it was 12 people who brought the gospel into the ancient Roman civilization. And look what happened. It only took 300 years. It's not very long in historical terms. It only took 300 years for pagan antiquity to be overturned and Christian civilization should be born. And one of the reasons why, there's a lot of reasons why, but one of the reasons why was that the pagan culture was spiritually exhausted. The polytheistic culture was spiritually exhausted. And the Christians brought in a new way of seeing that conformed to the way creation really was. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one God, and also conformed itself to the very structure of the soul, because Christ heals us in our soul first. Now this is what I'm thinking about a lot. I've been thinking about this for a couple of weeks. I think we're in the same place. I think we're in the same place. I think our culture is near exhaustion, which makes it a very perilous and dangerous time as we see these riots on the street and all of the clashes of the ideologies which promise light but will enslave. But for us, and I'm speaking here as Orthodox Christians, because the others can't do it. They simply cannot do it. The internal structures, I'm talking about the other Christian faiths, they're not strong enough. They've been swallowed up by it. They have been swallowed up by it. We can be swallowed up by it too. This is not triumphalistic. This is only to say that inside our Orthodox faith, in particular in its understanding of how God heals the soul, but also what is the composition of the heavenly realm, of the created order. They're not separated as we think. They're not. They are to be brought together, and they're being brought together. That'll be concluded in the final day. It's complete. It's the path to it. So it's also the path. Our salvation is also the path for the salvation of the culture, the larger culture. Does this make sense, what I'm saying? I think it's tremendously hopeful. This is the first time I wrote a little essay on it and I put it on Facebook. And I ran the idea about Jude, and about Jude being a theological explanation of what we call philosophically narcissism. My question was, and I asked a retired philosopher, professor, friend of mine, I said, is it fair to say that narcissism depends on a Christian substructure? He said, yes. Narcissism can't arise. Not narcissism, nihilism can't arise. He said it could have arisen among the ancient Greeks, and it cannot arise in a polytheistic culture. So nihilism is a function of Christian culture, thus the antidote to the confusion, the pain, the lostness, the despair, the depression, the anxieties, the suicides, all these deep spiritual afflictions of our culture is really orthodoxy properly understood, which is the healing of the soul and also the re-spiritualization, if you want to call it that, of the cosmos. And that's what we're doing today. So what we're doing is very important, and it's very blessed. So I'm just offering that as food for thought. And then secondly, this will be very short, I promise. The last one is, so in this worship where it is given to us the very structure of the heavens that brings healing and clarity to our soul, we say names. Lord, remember so-and-so, and so-and-so, and so-and-so, and so-and-so. And we read them 3 times. Why do you have to read them so many? Because every time we say it, the Lord hears, and so does the Theotokos. So we can be confident that those names that were prayed, God will act. Because where 2 or 3 are gathered in His name, especially in praise, because praise is the context in which we approach God, praise and prayer, those names will be heard, and God and the Theotokos and His saints will act. Think about that. It's like a prayer service in 3D, in full expression, full context. So that's what's been on my mind, and I thought I would share it with you all. So God bless you.
Thank you.